Right now to the latest on the invasion in Ukraine. The Biden administration and European allies announced new sanctions in response to what Russia's been doing. That includes economic penalties on Russian President Vladimir Putin's adult children and some top Russian security officials. It comes as international outrage over the apparent murder of civilians in one Ukrainian city intensifies. Joining us this afternoon is Channel 3's chief national political analyst, Greta Van Susteren. Greta, good to see you today. Thanks for joining us.
Nice to talk to you, Mark.
What are the latest developments in Ukraine? I know obviously this is changing really by the minute. What's happening there on the ground? So many people are hoping for some sign of good news.
You know, Mark, I have a lot of friends who are on the ground, and so I frequently make calls, and I was there last week. And last week, there, and in the beginning, in February 24th, all the attention by Russia was on the Kyiv area. They thought it would be a 3-day operation before they seized Kyiv. They had no idea that Ukraine was so strong and so determined, and it wasn't until like in the last 24 hours that it looks like Russia has given up on Kyiv and that area, which is in the northern area, and is concentrating instead on the eastern area, which is the area that for instance, the Donetsk area. And so that's where we're seeing a lot of the atrocities, by the way, too. Mariupol is sort of southeast area, and that's the place where the 300 children in the hospital were killed, and that's where the hospital, or in a theater rather, and that's in a theater where the big words children was there, and they should, and they knew the children, but they did it deliberately. So what we're hearing is that the level of viciousness continues to maybe rise, or at least continue as it is. They find people dead in the streets in some cities with their hands tied behind their back and executed. There's a report today that I heard of in which there are mobile crematoriums being brought into Mariupol. That's the city that they surrounded very early on, and that they're using the mobile crematorium. The thinking is that they're using that to dispose of bodies, so that it seems like the level of atrocities is not as extreme as we're saying. Incidentally, Russian media is saying that, or basically that the Western media is making this all up, and Russia's not committing these atrocities. But the situation on the ground is bad, and the humanitarian people that I talked to today, the sources I have, talked to 3 of them who said that food shortage is a big thing. Yeah, medicine shortage, food shortage. Those who are still alive, they've got real living needs, and they told me that they are not seeing the humanitarian aid, the food getting in to feed them. And so there's some block someplace. I don't know if it's a bureaucratic delay or whatever, but the crisis is just breathtaking. And I could go on and on recite it, but I realize we don't have all day to go through it. But to take it, it's enough to know that it's horrible.
It's horrible. It's so heartbreaking to see and hear about all of this, and then to hear that there could be delays with some of that humanitarian aid getting to the people who are, hiding in shelters and basements and things. Obviously, today one of the big stories as well, Greta, is about the Biden administration with these new sanctions. Talk a little more, if you could, about who these are targeting, and really so much talk about sanctions, but is this enough to really make a difference here?
Oh, well, I wish that sanctions were enough, Mark. But, we have the United States and other nations have keep imposing sanctions, hoping that will deter Putin. But, I will say this is that, what is the alternative? The United States and other nations have been providing weapons and have providing training and I guess humanitarian aid to the extent it's getting there. But if the U.S. gets overly involved, or another NATO country gets overly involved, that means there is, quote, NATO involvement, and that's what everyone fears, because unlike World War II, when there are no nuclear weapons, Russia has nuclear weapons now, and the fear that nobody wants to talk about is that if this gets escalated, so Putin says this is a NATO involvement, and the whole safety of the whole security of the Russian nation is at threat, is that he's sitting there with nuclear weapons, and it's not as though he has seen to be the most humane guy so far. That's certainly not true. Look at the atrocities, nor that he's particularly, at least in my opinion, sane. I mean, because look at what he's done: invade Ukraine, a country that was doing nothing to it. So it's hard to predict what's going on in Putin's head. He has nuclear weapons, and the United States and other nations are playing sort of the game of, like, how far can we go to help before Putin suddenly declares this a NATO engagement where it escalates. So, so the idea is to increase the sanctions, Hopefully it'll cripple the Russians a little bit more. Hopefully someone will go to Putin. One of his oligarchs, who must be close to him, was indicted by the Department of Justice today. But hopefully there's enough pressure. His two daughters, sanctions on Putin's two daughters, say hopefully that at some point, the sanctions hit the target and get Putin just to stop.
We all certainly hope so. Greta Van Susteren, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We appreciate your time, and I'm sure we'll have you back very soon.
Thank you, Mark.